I was 49 years, 11 months, and 14 days old when I finally drove away from the last subdivision I would ever live in. I still remember the exact smell of that morning in Aurora, fresh-cut HOA-approved Kentucky bluegrass, exhaust from idling Teslas, and the faint chemical tang of the sprinklers that ran every dawn whether it rained or not. I had just signed the last divorce paper, handed Diane the keys to the 4,000-square-foot monument to her control issues, and loaded everything I still owned into the back of a rented U-Haul. 2 toolboxes, a duffel of clothes, and the ashes of a marriage that had taken 18 years and every dime I'd ever saved. Ray met me at the Gunnison airport 3 hours later. He didn't ask how the settlement went. He just looked at the exhaustion carved into my face, handed me a thermos of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and said, 47 miles left, Jack. After that, nobody ever measures your grass again. We drove west until the world ran out of pavement, then gravel, then graded road. The last 27 miles were 2 ruts carved by 70 years of raised tires and nobody else's. When we crested the final ridge, the ranch opened up like a secret someone had guarded since the glaciers left. 50 acres of meadow cupped in a perfect bowl, dark timber marching up every slope, the cabin squatting in the middle like it had grown there instead of being built. Ray killed the engine and let the silence hit me like a drug. That's yours now, he said. 50 acres. 40 of them leased in perpetuity to the United States Forest Service, signed in 1987 when Ronald Reagan was still president and I was still young enough to scare bureaucrats. I kept the cabin, the mineral rights, and the right to tell every son of a bitch with a clipboard, a covenant, or a dream of telling me what color my shutters have to be to go straight to hell and keep walking. You're standing on the one piece of Colorado that can't be bought, sold, subdivided, fined, or ruled by a committee of bored retirees with nothing better to do than measure each other's lives in inches. I made damn sure of that. I believed him with every cell in my body. I was wrong. Ray died 21 days later, Tuesday, October 17th, 9:42 a.m. He was on the back porch splitting kindling for the wood stove, maul raised high, sun glinting off the blade, when his heart finally said enough. 81 years old, and still strong enough to quarter a lodgepole round in 4 clean licks. The coroner told me later it was instantaneous. I hope so. I found him face down in the sawdust with a half-smile like he'd just won an argument with God. The funeral was held in the Crested Ridge Community Hall because the Methodist Church only seated 60, and we had 112. There were 12 old smoke jumpers who'd parachuted into fires with Ray in the 50s and still walked with a limp from bad landings. 9 retired Forest Service Rangers who'd fought him tooth and nail in the 70s and loved him like a brother by the 90s. 7 Sierra Clubbers who'd chained themselves to bulldozers with him in the 80s. 3 county commissioners who'd lost every fight they ever picked with him. And me in the front pew trying not to cry in front of men who'd once carried 100-pound packs through burning canyons without a whimper. After they lowered him next to Ruth, who died in '89 when a drunk driver crossed the center line on Highway 50 and took the only soft part of Ray with her, Tom Whitaker, Ray's lawyer since 1976, handed me a banker's box sealed with duct tape, a key on a rawhide string, and a look that said this box weighs more than paper. Read everything, Tom said. Especially the red ink. That's the real will. Ray wrote it for whoever came after him. I read for 5 straight nights by kerosene lantern because the solar inverter died the week Ray did, and I hadn't figured out how to fix it yet. The 1987 conservation lease with the Forest Service was 152 pages of the driest legal prose ever written, but Ray had annotated every single one in red ballpoint that still bled when I touched it. Page 3. Told the regional forester I'd burn the cabin before I let them run a snowmobile trail through the meadow. He believed me. Page 17. If the HOA Karens ever show up, shove this paragraph down their throats and watch them choke. Page 59. Nuclear option instructions in the barn safe. Only open if they bring lawyers, tears, and a forged signature. Page 151. If I'm dead and they still come, give him hell, Jack. The mountains are bigger than all of us. Pour one for me when it's over. I laughed until I couldn't breathe, then poured 4 fingers of Ray's 1972 Old Forester, toasted the dark, and slept for 16 hours straight for the first time since 2005. Winter came hard and early that year. I learned the ranch the way you learn a woman you plan to spend the rest of your life with. Slow, reverent, and a little terrified of how much it could hurt you if you got it wrong. I walked every boundary at dawn with Ray's 1964 USGS quad map folded in my shirt pocket and a thermos of coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. I learned where the elk wintered on the south-facing slope above the creek, where the pine martens hunted the north-facing cliffs like silent assassins, where the creek undercut the bank so bad you could lose a boot and half a leg if you weren't paying attention. I learned that true silence has weight and texture and temperature, and after 18 years of Diane's nightly audits, garage door closed by 9 p.m. Sharp, trash can spaced exactly 18 inches from the curb, work boots not visible from the street, hose coiled clockwise on the brass hook she bought at Restoration Hardware for $89 plus tax. Silence felt like the first honest breath I'd taken since the Clinton administration. Spring arrived with the sound of a Subaru engine that had no business being above 8,000 feet in May. Margaret Thompson stepped out on May 3rd wearing a camel hair coat that cost more than my truck, khakis pressed sharp enough to cut glass, and boots so new the tags were still dangling from the pit zips like she'd bought them for the occasion. Courtney, her assistant, enforcer, photographer, disciple, and professional note-taker, followed with an iPad, a leather binder, and the dead-eyed efficiency of someone who'd never lost a covenant argument in her life. Margaret didn't waste time on pleasantries. Jack Harrington, president of the Mountain Laurel Property Owners Association. Your property was annexed into our jurisdiction on October 29, 2019. We have the signed agreement right here. She handed me a manila folder sealed with the kind of sticker you only see on legal documents that cost someone a lot of money to look legitimate. Inside was Ray's signature. Perfect, down to the tremor that started after his second stroke in 2017, the little tail he always added to the final L in Caldwell, and the microscopic coffee stain he got on every document he ever signed after 2010. The date was 3 weeks after he'd been on 24-hour oxygen and could barely hold a coffee cup without both hands shaking like aspen leaves. I felt the old rage rise, the same one that kept me awake during the divorce listening to Diane type up new HOA bylaws at 2 a.m. Because the old ones weren't strict enough to stop me from living like a human being. Ray Caldwell, I said, voice flat as a frozen lake, would have burned this place to bedrock, salted the earth, and danced on the ashes before he let an HOA within 50 miles. Margaret smiled the way a cat smiles at a canary with a broken wing. People change their minds when they understand the importance of community standards, Mr. Harrington. You have 30 days to bring the exterior into compliance. After that, fines accrue at $500 per day, compounded monthly. We take our viewshed very seriously. Courtney was already taking pictures. My 1994 Ford with the primer spots and the dent from the elk that ran into it in '09. The stack of firewood older than she was. The coffee can full of nails on the railing. The mud on my boots. The mud on the porch. The mud on the steps. The mud on the dog that didn't exist because Ray never owned a dog in his life. Evidence. I closed the folder. I'll have my attorney review this. Do that, Margaret said. And while you're at it, remove the commercial vehicle from view. It's a violation of Covenant 14.7, subsection C, paragraph 4. Also, the firewood must be stacked in an approved enclosure no later than June 1st. And the peeling paint on the east side of the cabin is visible from the ridge. We'll need that corrected before the summer residents return. She turned on her heel, coat flaring like a matador's cape, and left me standing in a cloud of dust and disbelief. That night, I opened Ray's barn safe for the first time. The combination was my birthday backward, then the year Ruth died, then the last 2 digits of the year Ray bought the ranch, 1957. Inside was everything he'd promised and more. Original lease documents with red margin notes that read like war diaries from a very angry, very funny soldier. Survey plats from 1957 hand-drawn by a man named Harold who died in Vietnam 2 years later. Letters from 4 U.S. senators and 1 very scared regional forester. The .38 revolver he carried through Key Sand with the grips worn smooth and 1 notch I never asked about. A bottle of 1972 Old Forester with exactly 2 fingers left and a note taped to it, for when they finally come. A cassette tape labeled "Play this when the bastards finally come." A manila envelope sealed with wax and marked nuclear option. Open only if they bring lawyers, tears, and a forged signature. I played the tape on Ray's 1976 boombox that still worked because Ray could fix anything with baling wire, spite, and a cuss word for every occasion. His voice filled the barn, gravelly and amused. If you're hearing this, they finally came for it. Don't waste time being polite. First, call Ellie Hoffman at the number taped inside the lid. Tell her Ray said it's time for the nuclear option. Second, remember what I taught you. The mountains don't belong to the people who write the most rules. They belong to the people willing to fight the hardest to keep them wild. Give him hell, Jack. And pour one for me when it's over. Tell Ruth I'm coming, just running a little late. I drank the last of the bourbon, wiped my eyes on my sleeve, and started making phone calls. Tom Whitaker confirmed the annexation was a forgery so good it could fool a judge for 25 minutes. 25 minutes was all Diane ever needed. Because of course it was Diane. My ex-wife had turned suburban conformity into a blood sport and a profit center. She got elected to our old HOA board in Aurora in 2008 and rewrote the covenants until the binder was 6 inches thick and the fines paid for her Botox, her Tesla, the marble countertops she replaced every 3 years because the veining wasn't quite right, and the vacation home in Vail she never told me about until the divorce papers. My work truck in the driveway overnight. $1,500. Satellite dish on the roof for internet so I could meet deadlines. Threatened lien and a letter to my biggest client claiming I was visually incompatible with neighborhood character. The garden hose left coiled instead of hung clockwise on the brass hook she bought at Restoration Hardware for $119 plus tax. Photograph, citation, shaming email to all 312 homes, special meeting, new rule banning visible utilitarian items between the hours of 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. and a personal visit from Diane at 10 p.m. with a printed copy of the new rule and a smile that could freeze gasoline. She did it all with the calm certainty that she was protecting property values from people like me, people who dared to live like we still had souls. The divorce cost me the house, my savings, my 401k, my truck, and 18 months of my life. I thought the ranch was the one place she couldn't reach. I forgot she'd spent 2 decades learning exactly how to weaponize rules against people who just wanted to be left alone. The campaign unfolded like a military operation planned by someone with a spreadsheet, a grudge, unlimited money, and a pathological need to win. Week 1, Margaret's courtesy visit. Week 2, Forged annexation papers, complete with notary seal from a woman who died in 2017, witness signature from someone who lived in Arizona and had never been to Colorado, and a postmark from a private mailbox in Denver. Week 3. Paul Grayson, local attorney with a $400 haircut and a smile like a shark in a three-piece suit, shows up offering free help with complex federal overlays. His business card lists a mailbox in a strip mall that matches Ridgeline Luxury Community's registered agent address and a phone number that forwards to Diane's old office line. Week 4. Ridgeline emails a purchase offer at 5 times assessed value with glossy renderings of ski-in mansions where my meadow used to be. The renderings are dated February 2019, 8 months before Ray died. Week 5. Margaret files 37 separate violations: peeling paint, unapproved outbuildings, commercial vehicle, visible firewood, clothesline. I'd hung 4 shirts to dry after a rain, unauthorized mud, excessive rustic character, and 1 creative entry titled General Failure to Conform to Community Aesthetic Expectations. Week 6. A drone shows up every Sunday morning for 4 weeks straight, buzzing the cabin at 50 feet. The 4th time I step outside with Ray's 12 gauge and put 1 round of 8 birdshot through the air 10 feet above it. The drone leaves so fast it nearly clips a ponderosa and disappears over the ridge trailing smoke. No sheriff ever comes. Week 7. The community meeting. Margaret rented the Crested Ridge Firehouse and turned it into a circus. She had a 58-minute PowerPoint titled Preserving Our Mountain Heritage that was mostly drone photos of my peeling paint, my truck, my firewood, and 1 artful shot of a porcupine chewing my corner post labeled Vermin Attractor, Health Hazard, Potential Vector for Plague. She played sad piano music and used the phrase community standards 52 times. I counted. I walked in 27 minutes late, boots dripping mud on the concrete, and took a seat in the back row next to old Tom Erickson, who'd fought fires for the Forest Service since Truman was president and still had soot in his lungs to prove it. Margaret went dead white when she saw me, then launched into her speech about outsiders and property values and how Ray had been a pillar of the community who understood shared responsibility. Tom started laughing so hard his coffee came out his nose and splattered the lady in front of him, who shrieked like she'd been shot. Margaret, he wheezed, wiping his mustache with a red bandana. I knew Ray Caldwell for 48 years. I was with him the day he told the regional forester he'd burn his own cabin and salt the earth before he let them run a snowmobile trail through his meadow. The day he joined an HOA is the day I eat my Stetson with Tabasco, wash it down with a gallon of creek water, and then kiss your ass in the town square at high noon. The room turned faster than a summer thunderstorm. By the time Margaret started screaming about junkyards, compounds, outsiders, and the collapse of civilization, half the audience was on their phones Googling federal conservation easements, and the other half was openly laughing so hard the fire chief had to bang his gavel just to be heard. Paul Grayson tried to take the microphone and calm things down. Margaret slapped his hand away so hard the sound echoed off the cinder block walls like a gunshot. The fire chief finally escorted her out while the room gave her a standing ovation for the wrong reasons. 5 days later I was served with a temporary ex parte restraining order alleging stalking, violent threats, intent to commit arson, creating a hostile environment for community volunteers, and possession of a firearm in a threatening manner. The complaint included 16 still photos of me on my own deck, holding Ray's 12 gauge. The timestamps claimed it was 11:47 p.m., the night after the meeting. I was 38 miles away drinking bad motel coffee and eating a burrito the size of my forearm. I had the receipt, the security camera still, the night clerk who remembered me because I tipped him $15 to use the microwave 3 times, and a stomach ache that lasted 4 days. The deputy who served me looked like he wanted to crawl under his truck and die. I just delivered them, Jack. I had 24 hours to vacate my own home. I spent every minute of it in Ray's barn. The safe opened with a sigh that sounded like Ray himself saying, "Welcome home, kid." Inside was everything he'd promised and more. Original lease documents with red margin notes that read like war diaries from a very angry, very funny soldier. Survey plats from 1957 hand-drawn by a man named Harold who died in Vietnam 2 years later. Letters from 4 U.S. senators, 1 very scared regional forester, and 1 death threat Ray had written to a mining company in 1982 that somehow never got sent. The .38 he carried through key sand with the grips worn smooth, and 1 notch I never asked about. The last 2 fingers of 1972 Old Forester. The cassette tape I'd already played twice. A manila envelope sealed with wax and marked nuclear option. Open only if they bring lawyers, tears, and a forged signature. Inside the envelope was a single sheet with a phone number, a name, and 3 words. Call Ellie Hoffman. I called from the motel parking lot at 2:13 a.m. Ellie picked up on the first ring like she'd been waiting 40 years for this exact call. Ray's nuclear option? She asked. Lord, I prayed I'd never hear that phrase again. Sit tight, Jack. The cavalry leaves Denver at 0500. And bring coffee. It's going to be a long week. The cavalry arrived 4 days later in 5 Forest Service Suburbans with government plates, light bars, and antennas that looked like they could phone home to Mars. Ranger Ellie Hoffman was 5'0", 58 years old, and had a voice like a chainsaw starting cold on a January morning at 9,000 feet. She walked the property with a GPS unit, a metal detector, a camera the size of a lunchbox, a thermos of coffee I'd brewed at 4 a.m., and a look that made Margaret, who'd parked at the forest boundary every single day to watch, turn her Subaru around, and leave without a word for the first time in recorded history. They documented 47 pieces of illegal surveillance equipment, 37 forged boundary markers, 6 cellular trail cameras live streaming to a server in Bulgaria, 2 fake rock cameras, and 1 motion sensor wired to a fake bear scat that would have fooled me. They took soil samples where the fake stakes had been driven. They left with 44 evidence bags, 7 federal warrants, and a promise that the next person who trespassed on conserved land would be arrested by someone who didn't answer to the county commission, the state legislature, the local chamber of commerce, or the ghost of Margaret's ego. The restraining order was dissolved by 9:32 a.m. The next day, the trespassing charges disappeared when the video evidence turned out to be timestamped 3 hours and 27 minutes after I'd checked into the motel with a receipt, a security camera still, a night clerk who testified under oath that I'd asked him to heat my burrito 3 times because the first 2 times it was still frozen in the middle, and a stomach ache that lasted 5 days. Margaret went on Channel 7 that night claiming recent federal regulatory changes gave local associations expanded jurisdiction over conservation land. The reporter ate it up like it was gospel. The Forest Service press office in Washington issued a correction so blunt it should have come with smelling salts, a warning label, and a priest. By noon the next day, the FBI had a file open labeled United States v. Diane Marie Harrington, Paul Grayson, Margaret Thompson, ETL. Margaret showed up at my motel at 2:17 a.m. the following Thursday looking like she'd aged 40 years and 40 days. She was carrying 3 banker's boxes and crying so hard she could barely speak. She lied about everything, she whispered. Diane promised me you were going to clear-cut the ridge for a private ski resort with a heliport and a members-only club. She sent fake permits, fake environmental impact statements, fake drone footage of equipment that was never here, fake emails from Ray supposedly begging me to save the mountain from you. She paid me $31,000 in consulting fees to harass you. She told me Ray signed the annexation because he was tired of being the holdout and wanted to die knowing his land was protected by covenants. I thought I was saving the mountain. She had 11 months of texts, emails, forged documents, bank records, USB drives, spiral notebooks, and a tear-soaked apology that went on for 6 pages. She was ready to help end it. We set the trap for Saturday, May 17th at the Pine Valley Coffee Roasters. Margaret called Diane's emergency number and delivered the performance of her life. Tears, broken voice, claims that I was broken, bankrupt, suicidal, ready to sell before the feds seized everything and left me homeless and hopeless. Diane took the bait and drove up from Denver in 3 hours and 43 minutes. I sat in the corner pretending to read the Real Estate Weekly while Margaret wore a wire in her bra, a second one taped to her ankle, and a third in her purse because the FBI doesn't take chances with people who forge federal documents for a living. Diane walked in wearing $7,000 boots and the sympathetic smile she used to give me when she was about to destroy my life. She spent 64 minutes explaining exactly how Paul Grayson could quiet title the federal interference, how certain forms filed in certain obscure offices in certain counties could make the conservation easement disappear, how I should sell now before the legal fees buried me 6 feet under and the interest compounded daily like a loan from the devil himself. She never admitted forgery on tape. She was too smart for that, but she laid out the entire criminal enterprise like a Harvard Business School case study, complete with projected ROI, contingency plans if the mark turned out to be unusually stubborn, and a casual mention of the other 68 properties she'd already stolen the same way. The FBI arrested her at Denver International the next morning trying to board Swiss Flight 17 with 2 encrypted drives, a one-way ticket, a passport in the name Danielle Marie Hart, 34 bearer bonds worth $38 million hidden in the lining of her carry-on, and a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty and excellent plastic surgeons. Paul Grayson took a plea before the coffee got cold and sang for 5 straight days. The raid on Ridgeline's real office in Aurora turned up files on 74 similar operations across 7 states. Diane had been doing this for 11 years. Total take, $41 million and change. Margaret testified for 7 days. She cried on the stand when they played the coffee shop tape, and she heard herself begging Diane to finish him before he destroys everything we've worked for. The jury cried with her. Paul testified for 6 days and never looked at Diane once. The evidence text needed 6 weeks just to catalog the hard drives. Sentencing was the first week of May, exactly 1 year to the day after Margaret first climbed my steps with her forged papers. The courtroom was standing room only. Reporters, victims from 6 states, the entire Forest Service regional office, every living soul who'd ever crossed Ray Caldwell and lived to tell about it, and one very old smoke jumper who flew in from Montana just to watch and brought a jar of Tabasco in case Tom lost a bet. Diane wore an orange jumpsuit 5 sizes too big and handcuffs that finally fit. The judge was Mina Hendricks, 73 years old, former prosecutor, zero tolerance for bullshit, and a personal friend of Ray's from the 1982 wilderness hearings who still had the scar on her hand from the day Ray taught her how to split kindling properly. She read the counts like a death sentence. 37 counts of wire fraud, 29 counts of forgery, conspiracy to defraud the United States, extortion, racketeering, violation of the Lacey Act, misuse of federal lands, attempted flight to avoid prosecution, criminal contempt for trying to bribe a deputy U.S. Marshal from the holding cell, threatening a federal witness, and 1 count of attempted witness tampering after she tried to have Margaret killed in county jail. 26 years federal time, no parole, 11.7 million in restitution, permanent lifetime ban from any real estate activity in the United States, and a personal apology to every victim read aloud in open court while standing, no notes, no water, no bathroom breaks. When the marshals moved to take her away, Diane finally cracked. She lunged toward the gallery screaming my name, promising appeals, exposure, revenge, blood, fire, brimstone, and a curse on my children I didn't have. 5 marshals carried her out while she kicked and cursed like a trapped animal in a wildfire. I stood up slow. The courtroom was dead quiet. Ray gave 40 acres to the United States Forest Service, I said loud enough for every microphone in the room. The other 10 are mine. You'll have 26 years to figure out which one of us has better lawyers. The ranch is quiet now in a way it's never been before, not even when Ray was alive, and the only sound was wind in the aspen and the occasional elk bugling at dusk. The fake cameras are gone. The forged boundary stakes have been pulled and burned in the wood stove one by one over the course of a very satisfying winter. The Forest Service expanded the conservation easement to the full 50 acres and named it the Raymond J. Caldwell Wilderness Stewardship Area. There's a bronze plaque at the trailhead that Ray would have hated with every fiber of his being, but Ellie Hoffman insisted, and some fights aren't worth picking. Margaret sold her house in Mountain Laurel, finished a 12-month inpatient program for severe anxiety and OCD, and now works for the Park Service counting bighorn sheep in the Weminish Wilderness. She sends me a Christmas card every year from places with no street addresses, no mailboxes, and no covenants. Paul Grayson lost his law license, moved to Nebraska, and sells title insurance under his middle name. He sent me a 20-page letter once. I burned it unread and used the ashes to season the cast-iron skillet Ray taught me to cook in. Mountain Laurel dissolved itself 11 months after the trial. The entrance sign came down last spring. Somebody shot it full of holes with what looked like Ray's old .30-06, poured gasoline on it, and lit it like a bonfire. Nobody bothered to replace it. The gatehouse is a deer carcass now. I still sit on Ray's deck most evenings with a bourbon and watch the elk come down at dusk. The aspen are turning gold again, same as the year Ray died. 47 miles of dirt road still separate me from the nearest covenant, the nearest committee, the nearest Karen with a clipboard and a dream. Diane will be eligible for parole in 2050. She'll be 77. I'll be 85, still splitting my own firewood with the same maul Ray died swinging, still parking my truck wherever I damn well please, still listening to the silence that Ray paid for with 50 years of fighting. Some things you can't buy, bully, or forge your way into. Ray knew it. The mountains know it. And now Diane knows it too. So tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone try to steal ground that was never theirs to begin with? Ever dealt with a control freak who thought the rules only applied one way? Ever seen the system actually work the way the founders intended it to, slow, creaky, stubborn, but unstoppable when it finally gets moving? Drop your stories below, no detail too small, no rant too long, no war story too old. And tell me where you stand. When the Karens and the con artists finally lose everything they spent a lifetime stealing, is it justice, revenge, or just the universe finally balancing the books after all these years? I read every single one. See you down there.